Donut, call Badar at 416.
Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Hour on Canada One TV. I've got a great guest for you this evening, Nizar Mawani, who is one of the smartest businessmen that I've dealt with over the years, a gentleman that has done business in Canada as well as in Africa. And he is probably like all of us, but even more so than probably most of us, has been following COVID-19 and the economic implications of it, as well as the healthcare implications of it incredibly closely, and has kept me abreast of them, sending me messages and emails on almost a daily basis. And so, Nizar, how are you? Welcome to our show.
Brian, thank you very much for having me on the show again. And I look forward to speaking to you and to the audience to share our global perspective, keeping in mind the local perspectives as well here back home in Canada.
Right. Okay, great. So let's talk about global to start with. You wanted to first start off talking about the WHO current position on the pandemic. Tell me what you know there.
Well, they said we haven't hit the peak yet. And the WHO, as you know, is now locked horns with the United States and with some other principal countries such as Brazil, who have threatened to actually come out of the WHO. I still believe that WHO has got a place in the world to prepare the world in the preparedness. I think that they have value, and I think they're quite right in their approach, and also their findings stating that the pandemic has not reached its peak. And you can see what's happening in just south of the border here. You can see the African countries that are not yet as hit as much as what Italy had, and so forth. So they are right that the numbers are going to just explode. And when they do, some of these countries may not handle the number of, and particularly like, in the south of the border, you can see that some of the pockets are already showing signs that the healthcare systems is not ready to handle such events. In New Delhi, for instance, they put up the largest hospital bed, 10,000 beds, just imagine. And so again, so WHO with its warning.
Sorry, I apologize. This is a new hospital they've just built and just opened?
Yeah. In 20 days, they built a 10,000 bed facility in New Delhi. So, and like that, they have built right across India to try to contain this problem. So,
really? So obviously they're assuming the worst is going to happen in India as well, or at least they're preparing
absolutely.
for the potentiality.
Exactly. And in some of these African countries, they don't have this kind of resources to be able to build hospitals of this kind, large institutions to support them financially and in technical support. So I think the world needs to pay attention to developing countries that have got pockets of problem and try to find resources to assist. I know our Prime Minister is really pushing hard to advance that goal, to try to assist countries. And he's working with the Rwandan president, who is the current AU chairman of African countries. And they're trying to figure out how they can manage this crisis. So the first part is the health issues that the WHO has sounded the alarm bells.
Right.
The more bigger problem I see is fueling behind it, just like a tornado, is it's going to be exponential in terms of economic fallouts. And I don't think that the North American population have actually understood the impact of this COVID and the situation of the economic conditions of the country.
Okay, so let's talk about that. You sent me a list of all the economic impacts. Do you want to review that list?
Yeah, sure. Let's go through that list. I think that in the economic crisis that we are facing right now is particularly in the jobless sector, the business sector, that is going to be very hard hit. I think the companies that are retooling as they go along and finding, it's not just the companies, it's from top to bottom, everybody has to reinvent itself. So if you look at Singapore right now, what a foremost authority in economic development and the successes of Singapore, they themselves are also reinventing themselves. So where does this economic fallout come through? Is the training of human resources. And as you know, human resources, we are placed number 22 in the world. So I think that in terms of our economic crash, that what I'm calling about 2008, what we went through in 1982, what we went through, I think this one here, we will have an impact on social issues, which are then going to be directly as a result of the joblessness in the companies, the bankruptcies. And I think in the background of it all, the government is trying to prepare the financial institution success in going through this. But you know, we've gone through this many times, that saving just the financial institutions' jobs is not enough. We have to go in the bottom down and saying where are the problems, which are the companies that are closing down, and how can we help them to facilitate. And when you see these companies that are having difficulties, I don't think that the government is addressing the issues of helping these companies. And I'm talking about the economic fallout in North America and in Europe. I think Africa is going to be spared, and I think China and India is going to be spared because of this huge population, and their economic activity is much higher. Our population base is only 40 million. So some of these small countries in Africa are containing very well. Some of the small countries in Europe and Asia are containing the viruses very well. And on the economic front also, they're managing to go very well. Like, for example, the Scandinavian countries,
Right.
New Zealand. So all these countries are coping, but I don't think that the North Americans have realized, or the European countries have realized, the economic hardships that are yet to come.
Okay, so you sent me a list. Let me see if I can get it up, and let me have you take us through it, okay? I just want, can you see this list now?
Yes. So this is an example of all the companies that I sent you that have actually gone into bankruptcies and declaring themselves. And these are prominent companies. Look at Nike, and they're
Okay. Let's just read it through.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Victoria's Secret declared bankruptcy. Zara closed 1,200 stores. La Chapelle withdrew 4,391 stores. Chanel is discontinued. Hermes is discontinued. Patek Philippe is discontinued production. Rolex discontinued production. These are all luxury items, right? The world's luxury industry is crumpled. Nike has a total of $23 billion preparing for the second stage of layoff. Gold's Gym filed for bankruptcy. The founder of Airbnb said that because of pandemic, 12 years of efforts were destroyed in 6 weeks. Even Starbucks has also announced 400 stores. WeWork isn't a great spot either. And then the list goes on and on. Nissan Motor Company may close down in the US. The bigger car rentals, Hertz, filed for bankruptcy. The biggest trucking company filed for bankruptcy with 4,000 trucks. Oldest retail companies, JCPenney, filed for bankruptcy. Biggest investors in world, in the Warren Buffett, lost 50 billion in the last
50 million.
months. 50 billion. 50 billion. Okay. And then you have the biggest investment company, the world, BlackRock, is signing a disaster in the world economy. The biggest mall in America, American Mall, has stopped paying mortgage payments. Most reputable airlines in the world, Emirates laying off 30% of its employees. US Treasury printing trillions of dollars to keep the economy on life support. An estimated number of retail stores in 2020 is 12 to 15,000. And countless number of hotels. I'm in the hotel business, and I can tell you hundreds of hotels, thousands of hotels have shut down operations, and some have closed permanently. And so the numbers keep growing. If you go further down the list, you can see the retailers announcing the closing: Gap, Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, Forever 21, Sears, Walgreens, GameStop, Pier 1, Nordstrom, Pyrus, Chico, Destination Maternity. So Macy's, these are serious, Kmart's, specialty cafes, and much, much more. And when you look at the unemployment, we reached the article that I picked up, it says 38 million in United States. It's actually 45 million and counting more every day. So the impact in United States is going to be felt throughout the world. It's not going to leave or spare anybody. The survival of the US economy, the survival of the Western economy, the survival of China. That is why, Brian, it's important for the world leaders to get their act together and come together, because we're fighting one battle, one enemy.
But
And
the
you
world
can
hasn't
see
been coming together. And, you know, President Donald Trump has been talking about reopening the economy and encouraging people to reopen the economy and bragging about the number of jobs that were created. So, you know, and people in Toronto have been talking about real estate prices declining, but yet the real estate market is on fire and there's no price decline whatsoever, it would appear. So what's going on? Are people just divorced from reality?
You know what, this is a very good remark, Brian, that you have made. Let me touch on United States first, and then I'll come to Toronto. So when you look at what has happened in the United States, the Republican Party, you look at one governor out in Texas saying that I'm retracting, I'm closing down, and I'm tightening up the reopening of the economy. The second Republican in Florida says, no, we're going to keep everything open, and he's doubled down. And so within the Republican Party, they've got a fraction, one saying that, you know, let's support Trump, and one blindly, and one says no. And this is going to be a far devastating consequences, but it's yet to be seen how this is going to fall out in the US elections in November. I think it's going to get much nastier as we move forward, because Trump is not going to stop. He's going to double down on his position. And then when we talk about the real estate prices in Toronto and all the other places that are still holding strong, I think Canada is quite strong compared to the United States. I talk about real estate in area of mixed development, which I'm involved with, hotels that I'm involved with. And I see that in Canada, we've got institutional, very stable successes. You know, our lending institutions they have recourse loans that they can go after the people, and also the equity ratio is about 50-50, 60-40. The very best you're going to get is 65% mortgage on your property in Canada. And most owners have been quite prudent in terms of having these acquisitions done in a very prudent manner. Whereas in the US, it's the opposite. They have given loans out to non-recourse loans. That's why you see so many foreclosures. And I'm not saying United States is out of the picture, out of the game yet. I think it's a strong economy. They've got strong fundamentals. You can see the Wall Street Journal calling out for all the investments that are there with major institutions. They've got large capitals still left out to spend. But you know, one key area that is innovation is being forgotten. The farmers are being forgotten. The small scale manufacturings are forgotten. And I think those are the people that are the heartbeat of America, heartbeat of Canada. They need support, they need direction. And I think right here in our own backyard, our Prime Minister seriously needs to create a new model of excellence. This is his opportunity. He's already in the hole by $350 billion as of today's reports. And right. I think those numbers are still low compared to by the time you finish next year, you'll be closer to $500 billion, almost $500 billion worth of debt. And next step is going to be taxes. How are you going to support all of these expenditures? Who's going to pay for it?
Well, and Texas is unbelievable with what's happening there from a pandemic standpoint. The infection rate is on the test is above 20%. And then looking at it as potentially as bad, if not worse than New York ever was. And you know, huge issue. And as you know, Tony Fauci, the head of the NIH in the United States on Monday to a Senate committee, said that he was worried that the infections per day that are currently around 40,000 in the United States could reach 100,000, and that the deaths in the United States that are, I'm not sure, I think it's 100 and something thousand, could reach 500,000.
He is absolutely right. And as you know, that he's a fallout with Trump, and he's made his predictions that, you know, even if you take 5% of the people infected, how many people are going to die? And as you know, the healthcare system is very different to the healthcare system what we have in Canada. And the healthcare system there, Two people went into the same hospital. One paid cash and one went into the healthcare insurance system. And the cost was astronomical. I think that the person with the insurance paid like $6,000 for the treatment, for the same treatment. And the same household person, the second person who paid cash, paid like several $100s. And so I don't know how they're going to get out of it. And I don't know what to believe, how much to believe, because there's some pockets are not reporting the accuracy of the numbers of what's taking place. And the other thing is, the last few weeks, as this thing has escalated, you know, COVID takes time it takes 2-3 weeks before it brews to the surface, to the top. And the ones that make it to the hospital, once they're on the ventilator, their chances of survival are minimized. And so, and then, you know, you're looking at the senior citizens, right? And you can see 80% of all the deaths in Canada were age 70 and plus, and they came mainly from homes. So this actually shows the gap in governance model in different provinces. And it really squarely puts down responsibility and the learning of how to now mitigate. I was reading the papers today and saying some of these facilities don't even have air conditioning. Come on, I mean, it's 37 degrees outside.
Well,
These
so
people are cooking.
you referred to the WHO earlier, and let me just read you a quote from the head of the WHO on Monday. He said, with 10 million cases now and 500,000 deaths, unless we address the problems we've already identified at WHO, the lack of national unity and the lack of global solidarity and the divided world, which is actually helping the virus to spread, the worst is yet to come. I'm sorry to say that, but with this kind of environment and conditions, we fear the worst. He also urged more governments to follow the examples of Germany, South Korea, and Japan, which kept their outbreak in check through policies that included rigorous testing and tracing.
There you go. You see, I said the WHO is right, spot on, that it's showing where the fault lines are. And I think that the serious senior leader in the world is President Trump, who I respect to a certain degree, because he's one of the guys who called out and said, hey, I'm stopping airlines going to Europe in early March. And if he had taken the bull by the horn and tried to manage it as a true leader for his people and the world, I think we would be in a different place today if he had taken this very seriously. And as you know, in the early months of February, when the first information started to come in, he just downplayed it. He said it's a regional issue. China is handling it very well. And we are where we are right now, and we are dealing.
So you think the major problem that we've had is that President Trump in the United States has not dealt with it seriously enough?
He's not, and I don't think the world should count on it. I think the rest of us should band together. I think we've got enough hands together to work together to make this thing work.
You know, it's interesting. The per capita infection rate in Canada is like 1/5 what it is in the United States. So, you know, people have criticized some things in Canada, but we appear to have done a far better job in dealing with this than the United States.
Well, just last week, CNN reported that, and CNN said that Canada has done really well, and yet Canada is not saying it, okay, we've done, it's good, we're on control. Canada is saying, no, we're doubling down and making sure that we're going to continue this prudence on making sure that the public out there knows that they have to take it seriously. As you know, Toronto announced yesterday that public masks are now mandatory.
Mandatory.
And I think that the rest of Canada and the rest of the world should follow.
We're talking.
I might as well add this. I might as well add China, as I've been traveling over the past many years, even 5 years back, going to China, I found that China was already putting masks because of the environmental issues and whatever else smog issues they had, and so was in India and most of the capital city, for example, New Delhi that I visited. So they were accustomed to wearing the masks. So I think that we have to have, if you have social distance problems, then at least you wear a mask to protect yourself and protect others around you, right?
No question.
So
no question. We're chatting with Nizar Mawani, international businessman and an extremely knowledgeable guy on what's going on right now in the international economy and COVID-19. We're going to take a break for some messages and come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Hour on Canada One TV. We're chatting tonight with Nizar Mawani, an international businessman. He's done business in Canada, he's done business in Africa, he's been to China, he's traveled the world. And he, because of his international business and because he's just a really smart, politically active and involved gentleman, has been following the pandemic closer than almost anyone that I know, and particularly the economic implications of the pandemic as we go around the world. Nizar, the number 2 country for the most infections now is Brazil, and they just declared a state of emergency in the capital city of Brasilia. What's going on in Brazil?
The president himself has got COVID, and he's following exactly the same footsteps as President Trump. He has put his people at risk. And as you know, Brazil is one of the most populous countries in South America. If you read about WHO and what its findings are, the catastrophe is just beginning to build in South America, and I think it's going to be catastrophic. I think the numbers right now, what they're calling for and where they're going to end, I think they're going to surpass United States. And
is it outside of Brazil as well, or is it just primarily Brazil?
Outside of Brazil as well. Almost all the countries in South America have got, they don't have as much resources as other countries. And I think that predominantly, nobody expected this thing to take off the way it did. And I don't think that the governments are ready. And I think the intervention of WHO, for instance, and with the support mechanics and resources, I think that the governments around the world need to pay real good attention and support these countries that have lack of resources in South America. I don't have the numbers right off my mind right now, but I think on your desk that I'd sent to you, South America has got some serious numbers that are growing, and they're following the footsteps of the United States as we speak.
But this president took things, and the president of Brazil took things incredibly, non-seriously, and really almost claimed that COVID-19 wouldn't impact anyone. And even now that he's got COVID-19, supposedly he's not wearing a mask and he's shaking hands and he's out there. How do you explain this? Almost crazy behavior. It's almost as if they're asking for COVID-19 to come and impact them. They're challenging it. They're like little boys that are saying, "Come on, fight me in the corner."
I think again, when I mentioned the last time that the democratic principles are not working out really well because somehow we are electing. The 4 pillars of democratic principles. One of them is to be able to elect the right person coming in. But then electing the right person should have some criteria by which he is elected. If you remember in Egypt, they elected Mr. Morsi, and then they had to take him out because he belonged to the fundamentalist party. Likewise, in Brazil, by popular vote, Trump won. By popular vote, the president in Brazil won. And I think that this shows leadership actually pays a big dividend if you have the right leaders elected in the right place. And Brian, you know very well, I'm not saying by nature I am, for last 40 years, I've been a liberal member, but I doubt sometimes even the liberal members that are our current prime minister. I don't give him an A score. I say, I'm watching every steps that he takes. For example, with the We group, that last week there was a big storm that they unilaterally gave them $900 million to spend. So, you have these weaknesses in leadership where in Brazil, he took it upon himself as though that he is the owner of these decisions, that he can do what he wants. And the price of poor leadership is a huge price. And if you compare that with Singapore, they hired the best minds to come in and manage their economies.
You've sent me a fascinating article about how India's largest slum actually overcame the pandemic. Tell us about that if you could.
Yeah, so in India, the slum areas, and this was not because of COVID, but there have been good best practices trying to manage the effectiveness in India, in pockets of India, and in certain developing countries, and particularly in this market, the slums in India. uh, they were able to contain it because they had good local management systems in place. And those good local management systems in place were able to put systems in place that they actually cordoned off the areas and to ensure that each and every household was well coordinated. So if anybody had a problem, they were able to deal with it and connect with it. And they used technology as well. So
Yeah, it's
that
fascinating the technology they use. They set up fever camps where anyone that had a fever was taken out of their home and were set up in quarantine facilities where there were schools and wedding halls and sports complexes repurposed as these quarantine facilities. And it's interesting, they offered to entice people to stay, free meals, vitamins, and I love this, laughter yoga sessions to get them to stay. But then also what they did is they used drones to monitor the movements of people that were contaminated so that they could figure out where the virus hotspots were.
exactly. And you know, these are success, like I said to you earlier when I started speaking to you today, was these are pockets of successes versus the pockets that don't have. And the difference between the two is the local leadership. The local leadership here took it upon themselves, these measures. These pockets are now that you can take these models and multiply them, not just in India, around the world, in Asia, in Africa as well. So these are the models that need to be taken on so that other places can emulate it. The difference is, are the other leaders willing to take these good models and make it work for their societies?
Now,
And
you sent me
even in
another
India,
article. You sent me another article about the deaths of hundreds of elephants, 350 elephant carcasses.
yeah, they are trying to figure out what really happened there. Was it poisoning by the people that are actually trying to steal the horns out of the tusks? What really took place? People can't figure out. That they're doing some. It takes, I think, 20 or 25 days to get these postmortems done in order to get the real results. We couldn't understand. Like, you know, when I read that article, I was quite stunned to have this many elephants die in such a small area. And certainly it may be human related, or it might be some poisoning that the elephants drank somewhere, and that's what happened.
Has it got something to do with COVID-19?
Oh, no,
Oh,
certainly
okay,
not.
good.
No, certainly not.
Okay, so tell us what else is happening in Africa.
Well, in Africa, as you know, that there's 54 countries. It's a 1.2 trillion-dollar economy. It's on its way to becoming $3 trillion economy. It'll be the size of India's economy in the next few years. And I think that Canada needs to pay real good attention. And I'm lobbying the Prime Minister, and I hope his people are listening to this, because if they are, I would tell them, point out that this is an opportunity. You're not just battling COVID here. You want to try to build the economic platform to be finding ourselves balanced in trade with United States, with China, with Europe, but also with Africa. Africa is 1.2 billion people, and it's an economy that's going to continue to grow. And I think we need to create some serious partnerships and initiatives, just like what China has done, India has done, Middle East has done. And recently, 6 months ago, Trump announced $60 billion package for investments in Africa. And so Africa right now, with 54 countries, from an economic standpoint of view, they'll continue to grow. And I think if you look at the IMF results, the IMF says, yes, this year will be a neutral year for Africa. Maybe they'll lose a little bit in the GDP, but next year they're going to bounce back up to 4.9 GDP in Africa. And then there are pockets of Africa. So if you now look at the economic side, and then you look at the COVID side, if you look at Egypt and South Africa have got the highest numbers, but they've got the highest numbers of testing. The rest of Africa are not even able to test because they don't have testing equipment. So whatever testing equipment they have is limited. So the find more people with COVID. And I think the thing is that people need to say Africa is not peaked in COVID yet. So they're going to struggle. And I think the rest of the world needs to take note of that and help these countries to overcome the COVID crisis. The economic crisis, I think, will continue to grow as it has done. This is the first time in 20 years Africa is going into a recession. So this year is the first time in, I think, 25 years.
And so what about Asia? What's happening in Asia?
Well, in Asia, as you know, you've got Vietnam still, they're leading the way there, controlling the pandemic. They've got, again, some fight backs as they open up the economy a little bit, but still have it under control. You have New Zealand, but the higher populations and the leaderships where they're weak. Philippines, for example, the leadership is not as strong in terms of maintaining this pandemic, so they're having issues. South Korea is doing really well. Thailand is starting to control. So Asia, I'm not too worried. I think they're going to come out this year economically and controlling the COVID much more better than Europe or North America.
So what are they doing right? How are they doing it right?
Well, simple. They went through the SARS and all the other pandemics before, so their preparedness was much stronger. As I mentioned to you, that traveling with as many as flights as what I was taking the last 6 years, what I observed in that part of the region, they already had at the airport, for example, the thermostat, the electronic thermostat. They didn't have men standing there with a gun trying to take your measurement of temperature at the airport. It was done electronically, like digitally. And
right.
So they're quite advanced in that. They're advanced in their medicine. They've got enough resources. And so they were well prepared more than any other places in the planet of Earth.
And so what do you think is going to happen?
I think that the 2000 and 2020 will be a very difficult year for pockets of North America, Europe. I think Africa will still struggle because what happens here will come into 2021. But based on what IMF says, the success will be in the hands of the leaders and the population that cooperates with the leaders. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for countries to cooperate and work internally and externally. Yeah,
You sent me these two graphs. Tell me about these two graphs.
Well, as you can see where Europe is in terms of COVID-19 deaths per million, where US is going, where Europe is gone, and where Canada is. And then when you look at the bottom chart, the bottom one, sorry, let me just open the screen up. It says the cases per million, and you can see US as it opened up the economy. Look where they went, and look
skyrocketed again.
Skyrocket, and this is about 10 days old. So if you see the chart now, it's even much more higher. And
it's interesting. They did flatten the curve, and it was heading the right direction, but then something messed up.
Well, leadership. They immediately went around. President Trump wanted to go in and open these campaign places where he would go in and talk, and then the rest of the country followed suit.
Right.
So I think that it's a leadership. It's from my perspective and your perspective and the rest, it's common sense prevails all. And I think I'm just hoping and praying that the rest of the US institutions will try to contain the damage because there is a gap in leadership in the White House, and that's very unfortunate.
Here's another chart that I'm going to try to give to you if I can get it up on the screen that I think is kind of scary as well. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
Look at this. Do you see that?
Yes.
US cases hit record heights.
Yeah, it went. It says 40,000, but right now they've hit now 50,000 as week. So, and that 50,000, you see, the chief medical officer in the United States was saying it's going to hit 100,000. Am I right? You just you spoke his name.
Tony Fauci.
Tony Fauci, yes, and he mentioned that he wouldn't be surprised that they lead to 100,000. You can just imagine with 100,000 cases a day, if it hits those numbers, we're talking 5,000 people dying a day.
Yeah.
Mass graveyards will have to open up. They will not have any options.
But this graph is This graph is interesting when you see what's happening in the world, where yeah, China and Singapore got things under control, but the balance of Asia is still growing. Europe got things under control, and it would appear is declining. North America is increasing, and then Latin America and the Caribbean is taking off. And really, we've not really seen that much from Africa yet. And I think what you're saying is you're worried about what's going to happen.
I can tell you one thing, that those numbers there, what we see from the media, this is one example that I would completely disagree with on Africa and the developing countries. The numbers are probably 10 times higher, but are not recorded
Really?
effectively. Yeah, 100% sure on that. So even if you say the number of deaths we have reached is 500,000 people, I would suspect that those numbers are skewed in probably about 50 to 100%, because the other developing countries do not have resources to even produce the numbers effectively. How do you go into rural areas? You know, Nigeria and how dense populated it is, and then you go in the countryside. So how do you look at Tajikistan, look at Central Asia? Do we have any numbers from there? Do we have the right numbers from Russia? So all of these numbers, when you look at this graph, it gives you some sort of an idea, but I think the world is sitting on a big, big problem. This is
Okay, so you've
numbers
done a
are
great job of talking about the problems. What's the solution, Nizar?
It's basic. I suspect it's simple. They must contain, they must continue to restrain from opening the economies. I think if you can see examples of PEI and the areas in Eastern Canada that they opened up to a certain degree. So the regionally, I'm agreeable that they should open up. But in dense cities areas, they have to be more careful how they should open up. They should have procedures, policies in place. And I think that they should restrain from opening at least for the next 2, 3, 4 months. As you know, September is going to be the month which will give you the real numbers of where we stand in the world. So the solutions is make sure that you're following the basic hygiene on an individual basis. Take leadership in your own hands. Look after your own family and your own interests, and making sure that all of the basic fundamentals are in place. Don't take secondary chances and go into bars or restaurants and think you're going to get away with it, because everybody wants to go out. Weather is nice. Summers are usually out for outdoors. So holding back is very important. So this is one area that you should take leadership on your own self. The second thing is on the government side and the responsibility on institution side. I think that responsibility from an individual to corporate to government should all be consistent, and they should all work in harmony together to ensure the objective is to protect ourselves collectively. And then on an economic side, I think that prudence is important. I think the government has a role to play, and as I said and indicated, that we need to create a new model. Our finance minister has to work with municipalities, he has to work with provinces, and they have to think outside the box and not just go out and save the financial institutions. Because saving just the financial institutions, it's not the objective. The real economy is in the hands of the backbones of the small business people. As we read that list, how many single stores have closed?
It was
And then you go
shocking, the
look
list
at,
of how many stores had closed.
and there's two major fundamentals that impact, or maybe three, maybe four, but let's talk about that. Why did they close? So first one, you can attribute towards the cost of real estate. It's very high. Then the cost of labor has gone exponentially. Minimum labor has gone up. And then you're looking at the fierce competition, which is driven by e-commerce. So the e-commerce alone is not the major factor. I think as e-commerce came in, I don't think that the real estate ownerships, mall ownerships, were smart enough to say, how do we save some of these tenants? They think that the tenants will come in and fill themselves up like they did the last 30 years. I'm sorry, they need to really take some responsibility. They made a lot of money over the years. They need to find and reset the rents and the structures to protect the small business. And I think government intervention is necessary there. And if they tried in the first round, they tried, but again, when you look at the companies that went under 500 stores, 400 stores, why did they go out of business? they didn't get enough stimulus package on rent concessions, for example. And I know firsthand some peoples that have got multiple stores, owners, they don't have that support. You know, there's a cap by the Canadian government to give them $20 million revenue. So if you're more than 20 million, you don't qualify for that rent subsidy. So how do these major institutions or major retailers survive that? And then the last is, you know, the people that are going to go out of job. We need to reinvent the minimum income per person in Canada. And you need to also find ways that how are these people going to retool and spend money in education? Because in the past, there have proven successful models that our country is number 22 in the world in that. So training manpower is important so that they can go back to work.
Well,
These are
Nizar
some of the
Mawani,
solutions.
thank you so much for joining us tonight on the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. I really appreciate it. You are one of the best read gentlemen that I know. We only got to go to about 1/10 of all the articles that you've been kind enough to send to me. So we'll have to do this again real soon.
Look forward to it, Brian. Thank you again.
My pleasure. So my cut, just if I could close with it, is that Nizar talks about a lot of things that are very relevant. For the last couple of years, I've been traveling every week. Nizar has been traveling most of his life. And for the last 3 months or so, I haven't traveled at all. I've been in this beautiful home office for the first time in a long period of time. Last week, the last 2 weeks, I spent a bit of time downtown Toronto for a process that I had to go downtown for. And everyone was very respectful. Everyone was social distancing in the elevators. Everyone was wearing a mask going in and out of the buildings. They wore a mask going in and out of the rooms. Once they were in the rooms, they were set up this was a meeting process. They were set up very separate. So people were respecting the social distancing guidelines in the rooms. And even when we went to lunch, we sat a good, maybe not 6 feet, but a good probably 4 or 5 feet apart. I went to a couple different stores shopping, and in one store I was asked to take my temperature, and they had a thermometer that they could just put to the forehead. Every store asked me if I was feeling okay, if I had a fever, if I had recently traveled, if I had been in contact with someone that had COVID-19. Most, if not all, of the clerks were wearing masks. At the restaurants, all the wait staff were wearing masks. Not all, but most of the restaurants I went to, I think actually all of them had directional signage on the floor as to which way you could go as you walked around the restaurant and the bar, and or the way you went to the washroom and back. Washroom attendance was limited to only 2 people at a time. So Nizar, I think people are taking it seriously, at least in Toronto. And I think that's good. And I think that's one of the reasons why. But at the same time, we're not restricting things completely. And I think that's important, because when you restrict things completely, people object, and then they object and go crazy. And so I think that it's important that we have opened up. I like the idea. I've gone out to a couple of patios, and I've been socially distanced, physically distant from people at different tables. So I think that we've got to do something to get the economy going again, and we got to get stores open, we've got to get restaurants open, but we got to do it in a respectful, healthy manner. And I think Nizar is right that government's really got to come to the table in a big way. When you think about if your land is expropriated because government wants to do something, then government has to compensate you. But in this situation, effectively, we were told by government that we couldn't operate. So if government is telling us we can't operate, and we know the reason why the government told us that we couldn't operate is because they wanted to flatten the curve, because they didn't have the appropriate healthcare capacity to deal with the problem. Well, that's a governmental failure. And so therefore, if it's a governmental failure that causes us to close our businesses, government has a moral and governmental obligation, a public obligation to help us through that problem. And so I think that the stimulus packages that you have seen, and that I believe you will see, need to be substantial, need to compensate people for what they've done for the benefit of society and the communities. And then I think the next thing is that we very clearly have to help other people. And so, there's different programs in Streetsville. A good buddy of mine launched something called Hoodstrong, which was a program to just buy gift certificates to some of the local stores. I think getting out there and buying gift certificates, even if you're not going to go there, or buying takeout, or going out and sitting on the patio, and or buying some of the clothes the clothing. This is a shirt that I bought at a store downtown that was 50% off. People are having stores. Let's frequent some of these people. Let's get the economy going again. And then I think finally, and probably most importantly, is that we all know the people that have been hurt the most are people that are above age something or other, 65 or 75. It's the elderly. And I really feel bad because I think a lot of them have been harmed, even if they haven't got COVID-19, because of the physical separation and the social separation from their families. I've heard stories about people dying and or just suffering dementia and going crazy because they used to get visited every day by their loved ones, and that was keeping them alive, and they're no longer having that. And so I think we have to rethink how we deal with our aged populations, our people that are vulnerable from a health standpoint, people of a lower socioeconomic status that have been, it would appear, impacted by COVID-19 to a far greater amount than the rest of us. And so there's something that we're doing wrong. And when you think about just long-term care, where 80% of all of the deaths in Ontario have occurred, if the virus can spread that quickly between rooms in a long-term care facility, then clearly the common cold did as well, and the flu did as well, and we just didn't know about it because it wasn't publicized. And so we are doing something wrong in the way that we are dealing with our elderly, and I think we need to change that. And actually then I'll add one more because Nizar mentioned it. And I spoke with a gentleman yesterday, former Senator Honorable Hugh Segal, who's been one of the biggest proponents of it. I think we do need some sort of a guaranteed annual income, and Nizar was talking about that to a certain extent. When you think about the CERB grants that people have been receiving, the government payments out, that's effectively what they're doing. And so what we have found is that in a time of pandemic and a time of need, we've effectively given a huge portion of our population a guaranteed monthly income. And it makes sense. And it insulates them from the worst things that can happen. And so I think that something like that does make sense. Nizar, back in 1988, I actually wrote a mini thesis on the need for a guaranteed annual income. So that's another conversation you and I should have at some point in time.
Look forward to it. Everything what you said, Brian, is excellent synopsis of what we talked about. And I totally agree with the summary that you put forth. There are just a couple of things that I might add. One, the reflection of what you saw in Toronto is a reflection directly onto the graphs showing that we have beaten COVID. Now we just have to keep maintaining that to ensure that it doesn't catch on fire. The other thing is, which is more worrisome to me, is the economic fallout. And I think the audience, we must lobby the government to do a lot more so that the fallout is minimized in all the areas that you have spoken. So thank you very much for the opportunity speaking to you.
Thank you, Nizar. That's Brian Crombie for the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. I'm on every week on Canada One TV. You can get it on Canada One TV YouTube station, on their Facebook account, or on my website, which is briancrombie.com. And I encourage you also to check out my radio shows, which are on Saga 960 AM every night, Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock. Those podcasts and video casts are also available on my website, briancrombie.com. Thanks for joining us. Good night. Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on the Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV.